Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Daily Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me today, Mark Oliva. Mark is the Director of Public Affairs for the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Most of you will know that organization is NSSF. Mark, thanks for joining us today.
Paul, it's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate taking the time to speak with you today and be able to talk to your listeners as well. So thank you.
Yes, sir. So let's get started with, and let me do this here fast. If you are watching and you have comments or questions, just comment on the live video. We'll get your comments up. We'll discuss them on the air. But Mark, let's start off with, everybody knows who the NRA is. Everybody who's watching this knows who the SAF is. NSSF, what is that organization?
Yeah, so the National Shooting Sports Foundation is the Firearm Industry Trade Association. So the best way that I can kind of describe it to people is we are the organization that represents the manufacturers, the distributors, the retailers, the ranges. So we do everything to make sure that those people are able to stay in business. Think of the gun counter as kind of the dividing line. So we take care of everything that happens to get that gun to the counter. So everything from making sure that manufacturers can get bar stock, can ship their goods, get it to a distributor can get it out to the retailer can get it to you as the customer. And once it crosses that counter, that's kind of where groups like your own, like the Second Amendment Foundation, really kind of take up and start to work on behalf of the gun owner themselves. We represent the industry, we're a trade association like any other trade association, except our product just happens to be firearms and ammunition. So that's kind of the best way to kind of understand it is that gun counter really is the dividing line.
And joining in a little bit late, but still here, Rob Morse. Rob is Self-Defense Gun Stories. He also helps me out on the Polite Society podcast. Next thing I'd like to talk about real briefly, Mark, is that the NSSF, last year we kept hearing that there was more than 8 million new gun owners. The numbers from that come from NSSF. And you guys do something a little bit unique. You take the FBI background checks numbers and you put them in a pot, stir them around, add some special seasoning. How does that number happen?
Yeah, it's. I wish it were some kind of crazy alchemy like that. It really is the work of really good researchers on the NSSF staff that take that number that's released by the FBI, which is gross data. That's background checks that they release every month. For every purpose related to firearms. So that's the background checks for gun sales. It's the background checks for concealed carry permits, periodic rechecks on those permits. And some, you need to understand that some states will check you sometimes every month, and some will put it in everybody's permits in every quarter. So they're checking to make sure that there's not a reason to revoke that permit. That gross number will also include background checks for suppressors and for any other Form 4 type item. And that gross data is released by the FBI every month. We take that and we distill that information down. And we exclude everything that is not coded for the sale of a firearm. So we look at the codes on those, and we only capture those that are associated with the sale of a firearm. And that way we can get a little bit closer to what that baseline is of how many guns are being sold every month. It's not a perfect science. And there's a couple things that we always try to make sure that people understand. You can buy multiple firearms on one 4473. As long as you're buying those firearms at the same time, at the same location, there's no need to run 5 background checks. If you're going to buy 5 firearms from the same retailer at one time, they're just going to run one background check. So we won't capture multiple sales like that. In addition, we also won't capture the data of the states that have Brady alternatives. There are 25 states that currently you can use your active concealed carry permit. You go in, you fill out your Form 4473, just like usual, answer all the questions, sign it, and then you're able to present your identification and your active concealed carry permit. Those states are allowed to use those as alternatives instead of reaching out to the FBI and running another background check. So that data is never captured by the FBI, therefore we never capture it. However, this is the closest we can really get to on a month-to-month basis to kind of get a good idea of what the health of the firearm industry is. We can understand how many background checks are being conducted for the sale of a firearm. And last year, in 2020, we had over 21 million of these, 21 million background checks conducted for the sale of a firearm. By far, records surpassed the previous record of 2016, where we had 15.7 million background checks. And so far this year, we're on pace to come really close to that. Again, it's a very bold prediction to say that we come up to 21 million again. But right now, we're over 7.1 million background checks just through the end of April. So it is still a very healthy and very vibrant firearm market out there right now.
Go ahead, Rob.
Mark, that's what you just said is a very conservative number. And in any other year, I'd go, oh, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Except you and I go to the gun counter and lots of things that we expect to see aren't there. A lot of popular models are missing in quantity or style. There may be a gun you can get, but the selections are limited. And then you go, oh, I'm a new gun owner. I'd like to buy a few bullets, and the ammunition prices have spiked by a factor of 4, which leads you and I to wonder what those numbers, 21, 22, 23 million, would look like if we could satisfy the demand of the customer the way we've become accustomed to.
Yeah, certainly, Rob, you're right. It is putting a strain on manufacturers, and it really is a testament to the resiliency of the manufacturers to be able to meet the demands that they're having right now. You're right. Every time you walk into a retailer, everywhere I walk into a retailer, the display cases are bare. So what that's telling me, with the number of background checks that are still being conducted, and April was a record April. It's the strongest April ever on any that we've ever had going back to 1999. So what that's telling me, though, is that since we're able to keep that pace of background checks, what's happening is people are walking into the retailers. They're saying, this is the firearm I want. They're putting in their order with the retailer, who's pushing that back through the distributor and back to the manufacturer. That firearm, when it shows up at the retailer, is never going in the display case. It's getting into the back room. They're looking at it in their A&D book. When it comes in, they're calling that customer saying, come on in, we'll do the paperwork and get you set on the way. So that gun never gets onto the display case or onto the shelf. So it's telling us that things are still keeping at a very fast pace. And the ammunition, you're absolutely right. And the thing I think is important for people to understand is aside from 21 million background checks last year, we did a survey of our retailers to kind of get an idea of who was buying all these guns and why they were buying these guns. And retailers told us that 40% of the people who were coming in last year were buying a gun for the very first time. So that's an injection over the year. If we look at that 40% figure based on 21 million background checks, that tells us there were at least 8.4 million people who bought a gun for the very first time last year. Now, if I had told you at SHOT Show in January 2020 that we were going to have 8.5 million new gun buyers this year, you'd have looked at me like I was insane, and you'd have been right to think so. But it happened, and everyone's been kind of reacting to that. So that translates to the ammunition problem. If we look at that, just 8.5 million people bought one gun, and they went out to buy just 50 rounds to go with that one gun, that's going to come up to 420 million rounds. Now, we obviously see that there are a lot of people who are continuing to buy guns. There's folks like us who are already gun owners who are buying more guns. Mm-hmm. And so everyone can get that caliber that they're trying to get. On top of all that, you have a little bit of toilet paper effect. So You're walking in, you see shelves are bare, and you're like, ooh, man, I better grab myself a box of 9mm while I can. I better grab myself some 30-06 while I can. And it starts to compound itself. And that's kind of what's happening right now. Manufacturers, that the ammunition companies, are making it as fast as they can. Jason Vanderbrink put out a video about Remington coming back online in Arkansas about a month ago. And he said, hey, we're cranking it out 24/7 every day. I mean, they're running shifts around the clock. So, again, I'm trying to remind people, if you're not the one buying it, it's your neighbor. People are buying it. Unfortunately, it's going to be something that's going to be with us for a little while, just because it's going to take time to continue to meet that demand. And it's difficult. I mean, everyone's like, well, why can't the manufacturers just open up a new plant or expand production? If they put a shovel into
happen overnight.
Exactly. So if you put a shovel into the dirt today, you're not going to turn the lights on that factory for at least 3 years. And that's a capital investment of a lot of money that has to go into it. And these manufacturers are trying to make sure that they're making decisions that are going to sustain them through the off years. So if we look in the history of this, the last record was in 2016. We had 15.7 million background checks. And what we saw in 2017, 2018, everyone expected that Hillary Clinton was going to be elected, and that's why gun sales were going crazy. So what happened in 2017 is they plateaued off, and they kind of settled out. They weren't as high as they were. They weren't the 15.7 million sustained. They went down to about 13 millions again. They were still higher than they were 5 years before, but they settled out a little bit. And unfortunately, that meant that some of the smaller makers just couldn't survive that downturn of the market. And this happens with any manufacturing industry. I mean, not just firearms. Everything kind of goes through a cycle. So we're all watching this cycle, and I think the manufacturers have learned those lessons. And I think about a company, I had a buddy who used to turn barrels for a company, Warsport, made nice little AR-15s in North Carolina. They were just too small to make that turn for the market, and they ended up getting sold off for parts. So nobody wants to see their company get sold off for parts. And I think the manufacturers are trying to make sure that they're making good financial decisions that can sustain them in the out years, 5, 10, 15 years from now, so they can maintain profitability. So they're trying to make sure that they can do that to make sure they stay ahead of the game. So because this will settle out sometime, and where it's going to settle out and what that number is going to be is to be seen. And it likely won't always stay at 21 million. It'll probably settle out some year. But again, I think it's important for a lot of people to understand. In 2019, we had 13.2 million background checks. In 2020, we shot up to over 21 million. So that's a huge spike. Wow. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we'll settle out somewhere. Where we settle out is to be seen. But it's a healthy spike. We're all excited about it, and I think it's important for all of us to be engaging these new gun owners and to bringing them out to the range, make sure they're learning how to use that firearm safely, and get them engaged in not only their passion for the shooting sports, but also those freedoms that we have to make sure we safeguard that go along with it.
We got to remind them that there was a Trump slump, because they're going, why is it so expensive now? What are you guys doing to me? Sorry,
Parker. Yeah, exactly. I talked to a reporter a couple of weeks ago, and I told him, I said, listen, it used to cost me 33 cents every time I squeezed that AR-15 trigger. Now it costs me $1 every time I squeeze that trigger. So, it's a third of the price has jumped up by threefold on the ammunition for AR-15 ammo for 223 or 5.56. So it's definitely having an effect. I think probably a lot of people like me are spending a little more time dry firing and a little less time on the range. Because one, it's just hard to find a replenishment of the ammunition, but two, it's a little more expensive these days.
Want to get in a couple social media comments here. Off of YouTube, is NSSF going to lawyer up to protect manufacturers from the demented dictator Biden? I believe you guys have lawyers on staff. I've seen you guys file lawsuits before.
Yeah, so our senior vice president and general counsel is Larry Keene. He's my boss. He's who I work for. He's our lead lawyer, and we have lawyers that we work with when it comes time to represent some of these cases. It's important to understand. I think a lot of people don't understand is that when it comes to legal proceedings, we have to have standing. So we have to have standing when it comes to the manufacturer. So when we start looking at issues like what the president has pushed forward with his proposed rule through the Department of Justice affecting pistol braces and trying to reclassify those under the NFA, or we start to look at what he wants to do with so-called ghost guns, those are where we will have standing. So right now we're collecting all those comments about the latest order about so-called ghost guns, and we're collecting those from our members, and we'll make public comment into the Federal Register when it finally gets posted on the Federal Register at the appropriate time. But yeah, we have gotten involved in some of these cases. We're very closely watching, the cases at the Ninth Circuit with the AR-15 bans and the magazine bans, and watching those cases. I guarantee that no matter how that those end up at the Ninth Circuit, they're going to be appealed, and those will probably be headed to the Supreme Court. We're very closely watching the New York State Rifle Pistol Association case that's going to be heard at the Supreme Court. That's a case again where we don't have standing because we are a manufacturer. We're not a group like you guys at the Second Amendment Foundation where you represent the users and the owners of these guns. So sometimes we can be involved when it has to do with the manufacturer's ability to be able to produce a firearm, which again is a constitutionally protected right. So when it comes to the production and manufacture and the sale of those firearms, then we can be involved. But yeah, we are actively involved in many of these cases.
Well, you may not have standing, but I guarantee if that ruling comes through the way we're hoping it does, you're going to be affected because sales of handguns in New York, New Jersey, Hawaii, Maryland, all the restrictive states where it's currently may issue and it'll go shall issue, handgun sales in those states are going to boom.
They'll skyrocket. Yeah. And Paul, it's interesting. If you want to get a little bit nerdy on some of the legal stuff about this, it's, so we look at the case there, and in the two previous cases that were heard at the Supreme Court about the Second Amendment are McDonald and Heller, which go back, a decade. Mm-hmm. So look at Heller. Heller affirmed that the right to keep and bear arms is an individual right. It's your right. It's not the government's right. They can't take it away from you willy-nilly. They have to have good reason. You have to be a prohibited individual for them to deny you that right, that you're a danger to society. McDonald held that the states are required to protect the Second Amendment, just as if they're required to protect the First Amendment or the Fourth Amendment. This is a right that is so important that it can't just be left to the federal government. The state authorities have to also do what they do to protect that. So if we look at those two decisions, that will really help to kind of inform where we believe this case will go. You have the right to keep and bear arms. Those are two separate rights protected under the Second Amendment. That was affirmed by Heller. You have the right to keep, let's keep that in your home, and bear, that means carry it wherever you go. That's your individual right. McDonald said that the state has to protect that. So what we're looking at the New York State and Rifle Pistol case is that the state is denying, arbitrarily your ability to carry a gun beyond the doorstep of your home, that they're going to just make a subjective decision. So Mark, if we look at the way, yeah.
Well, Mark, to add fuel to your fire, the state's not quite saying that. They're saying, all the states grant permits of some sort. Now watch what New York did. They said, you and I, if we were the plaintiffs, you can take your gun from your home. You can take it to the range. By the way, if you've looked at the size of New York, you and I might get in the car and drive for 10 hours to get from our home to a range where we're going to go compete. But we can't take it next door to our neighbor's house. So
exactly. They
got themselves in a bind.
Yeah, exactly. They said that you can bear it only to certain locations. But again, that is arbitrarily limiting your right to exercise your right wherever you go. And so if we look at we have 5 constitutionalists, 5 textualists, 5 originalists that are sitting on the Supreme Court now, and they go by what the decision says. They go by what the law is written at the time it was written, not this amorphous change that can happen over time in this new interpretation of law. It should inform us where this case will go. Now, I say that, and I warn everybody. It is to try and predict what the Supreme Court is going to say. You're better off going to buy a lottery ticket and telling everyone you're going to start putting a down payment on that new mansion because you believe you're going to win. But if we want to look at this and see how this should be, held out, that Heller and McDonald should inform how the New York State and Rifle Pistol case. And Paul, you're absolutely right. If that turns over, then you're looking at a whole lot of people. There is certainly a pent-up demand. Mm-hmm. We talked about background checks earlier. It wasn't just states like Texas or Florida or Montana that had rising background checks for sales. It was every state. And even states like New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania that tried to close down gun stores in the middle of the pandemic and were taken to court and lost. Those states all had rising numbers of background checks. So we can see that citizens in those states want to exercise their Second Amendment rights too. So there's certainly a pent-up demand in those states for gun rights.
We get a couple more comments in here. Going back to the when we were talking about the explosion of NICS checks, Jackie says, good, thank God patriots are buying guns for their protection. And I want to go to Gerald next. He says, take away that extra money and prices of everything going up, ammunition will return. Yeah, the ammunition thing, it's going by, I've got a large purchase of ammunition. For me, large. For some, not so much. I've got to buy 1,000 rounds here in about the next week for some training I'm going through this summer. The prices have fallen the last 3 weeks that I've been looking. They're not to where I'd like them to be, but they're not where they were a month ago.
Yeah, it really comes down to the law of supply and demand, right? I mean, this is the free market at work. I'll tell everybody, I'm telling you now, there's no hidden warehouses that manufacturers are stashing ammunition. It's not an alien conspiracy. The government's not buying it up so you can't get it. And I promise you, the military's ammunition comes from a separate supply source out of Lake City. It has nothing to do with what's available to us. There are plenty of component parts. It really is a matter of volume, and people just buying. So, I'm concerned already for my hunting season next year. And I'm already thinking what 30-06 ammo I need, what 6.5 Creedmoor ammo I need, what ammo I need for bird hunting. I mean, those are things that I'm thinking about now, and we're several months away. So it's going to be a tough road for us for a little while, but it will get better. I'm very happy to see Remington come back online. It's great for the industry. It's great for Vista Outdoor, which is, of course, now Remington's part of the Federal Premium family of ammunition. But it's definitely going to be a boon to us on the consumer end of it, because now there's going to be a greater volume, and that'll help reduce some of those prices.
I don't know if you can speak to this or not, Mark, but if it's difficult for your average reloader to get a hold of primers, for your average reloader to get a hold of new casings, would it not be just as hard for manufacturers who need that much bigger amounts to get a hold of the same things? Is that that would seem to me to be a challenge to getting the market filled back up?
Yeah, it's really tough on reloaders right now. I think a lot of people are sitting on a whole buckets full of brass, but no primers to use. And the way the primers are sold, or even brass, or any of the component parts for reloaders, it really is sold off in an excess capacity. So Federal Premium is your largest manufacturer in America for commercial ammunition. I mean, they're just the biggest guys on the market. And Jason Vanderbrink is the president and CEO of that company as well, and he's explained it in videos to the consumers as well, as that he understands it. But what Federal is doing right now, and probably a lot of the other manufacturers, is they are turning to make sure that they can make as much finished ammo as possible to meet the market demand. So that means any excess primers, excess brass, all the component parts, that stuff is being used to make finished ammo and not being sold off as excess inventory for the reloader. So it is making it tough for everybody across the way. I know that there are manufacturers I've spoken to who are looking to expand some of their offerings for ammunition. And they're looking to making sure that they can make their own primers. So it is, they want to make sure that we don't have this kind of bind in the future that, one manufacturer is beholden to another because they can't get enough primers or get enough component parts. So I think you're seeing a lot more manufacturers who are going to be making sure that they're sustained for the long term, for those lean days, when you have, market demand like we have right now, and to make sure that they can still provide the ammunition that they want and the calibers that they're going to be able to provide. So it's I think it's causing a lot of manufacturers to kind of take a look at the health of their inventory and their supply chain, and it's going to take a little bit, but I think you're going to see some of them start to try and make some moves to make sure that they are a little less dependent on some of the component providers.
Charlie Chambers wants to know, is there any news of new primer and powder manufacturing facilities being built in the USA? And Mark, my opinion on that is our environmental regulations in the United States are so tough that it's really hard to build a factory that produces teddy bears, let alone ammunition.
Yeah, Paul, you're right. Last time I checked, they're not authorizing any new copper mining in America. So, finding enough, copper to make just the bullet itself is going to be tough. And I lived in California for many years. It took just a burger stand. It took about average of 3 years to get all the appropriate permits to open up a burger stand in California. So yeah, it's tough. And these are the decisions that a lot of manufacturers have to make over time to make sure that investment is going to pay off. Paul, I'm sorry, Rob.
You brought something to mind, Mark. And Paul, if this is too geeky, let's take a question from a listener. California inadvertently did us a small favor. You and I have always wondered what the relationship was between gun owners, new gun owners, and NICS checks. But aren't there states like California and Massachusetts who register their own gun owners? Hi, this guy's brand new in our database. Are those states forthcoming when you ask them, how many new gun owners do you have? What do they look like?
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. There are states that do have state registries and will require you to be put into a database. But there's no federal database. So for hard numbers across the country, it's really hard to say. That's why when we did our survey, we asked our retailers what they were seeing. But yeah, I mean, it'd be a nice, interesting deep dive into some of the data for these states that do have registries. I'll tell you, me personally, I really am uncomfortable with the idea of validating the idea of every gun owner being put into a database and saying that, yeah, here's a good reason that we have this. This is a right. I remind media, they ask me all the time, well, how many gun owners are there in America? And I said, well, it's impossible to give you a hard number. And I said, Pew probably does the best that they can. And they do their surveys every year of gun owners. They say that roughly, 3 out of 10 or so, about 33% of America has a gun. So that tells us just a little over, 100 million gun owners or gun owning households in America. But I really think that number's low, and here's why. If you call me up and we're going to talk about guns, I'm going to talk with you all day long because this is what I do. But if you called my personal cell phone and said, hey, Mark, I'm with Pew Research and I want to find out about the guns in your home, I'm hanging up on you. So I think a lot of other gun owners are like me, and they self-select out of these surveys because, one, I don't want my firearms to become a possible target for theft or any kind of crime. But two, I also don't want to be a target for any kind of social woke culture that's going to come out and try to, vilify me because I want to exercise my rights. It's a private matter for many gun owners.
We've argued on the show, if there are places where somebody calls you up and say, do you have a gun? And someone who doesn't goes, would I want to admit that my home is unarmed? Or they go, do you have a gun? Because I want to rob you. And go, never heard of guns. So that's why I was thinking a few states might give us some decent data, at least so we understand how to compare. That is such a tough job.
Yeah.
My hat's off to you. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, it's tough, and that's really why we rely on those NICS numbers every month because it is the least invasive way we can do this. There's no central database. I really hope that this idea we talk about, the universal background check law that they want to push through, and that really is a precursor to a national registry because it doesn't work without a registry, and that's why we vehemently oppose any kind of idea like that. But there's no central database, and honestly, I'm very comfortable with that idea.
Do you now? You would be the guy, public affairs, media relations for NSSF. I assume media come to you and say, "What does the NSSF think about mandatory registration?" We've never seen it work. We have too darn much data every time we pick up the paper. We're reminded constantly that criminals don't engage in background checks. They don't get their guns legally. Every law that applies outside a gun show applies inside it. Does the media come to you as a reference, Mark?
They do. They reach out quite a bit, actually, and I really try to work with them on a very honest level. I try to make sure that I'm answering their questions. I try to treat them as fairly as possible. I understand that some of them may have familiarity with firearms, some may have none at all. So I try to make sure I educate as much as I answer the questions for them. It's interesting when you have that conversation with some very well-meaning media who just don't understand the second and third order effects of some of these gun control proposals. And I remind them that criminals, by definition, don't follow the law. So all you're talking about doing is putting further restrictions on you and I who do follow the law for us to be able to defend ourselves and our families and exercise our Second Amendment rights. So they don't always understand that. But, and they've asked me that question. Why would the industry be against this idea of a national registry? And the very first answer to that is the national registry is always a precursor to confiscation. Mm-hmm. And we can look at recent examples of New Zealand at that and Canada. I mean, Canada's getting ready to start snatching up firearms from their law-abiding citizens up there just because of a unilaterally injected law that was put forward by their prime minister and his cabinet, which kind of reminds us all of why it's so important for us to have the Second Amendment and protect that Second Amendment, because there's no other nation like ours that has that unique protections for our God-given rights.
David over on Facebook says, absolutely, Mark, I wouldn't talk to anyone about my firearms. I'm right there with you. The next thing I wanted to talk about is, I'm going to go two different directions. First, I want to talk about this, and that is going to the registration. One of the benefits, we recently, a few years ago, a little over a year ago, the bump stock issue came up. Several states said they're no longer legal. You need to turn them in. And I believe it was New Jersey that got, out of all the orders for bump stocks, you must turn them in. They got a grand total of 0 turned in. With registries, they could just go and get them. And they would have.
Yeah, Paul, you're right. You're exactly right. There isn't a gun control law that New Jersey politicians or Governor Murphy hasn't seen that he doesn't want to embrace. He's pushing through another round. They're trying to, again, make it mandatory for so-called smart guns, which is, again, one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard because the technology doesn't work. But they want to make sure that any firearm retailer in the state is selling at least one model of these, and this is just crazy. But you're right. A registry is a first step to, they know exactly who has the firearm, and they know exactly where that firearm is at any given time. And I want to remind, I know this is probably something a lot of your viewers know, but again, it's one of those things just to kind of keep in the back of your mind. They're not tracking the gun. They're tracking you. So again, it becomes very concerning when our government is requiring that much information about us. We are the government. As much as President Biden stood there at the podium in Congress and said we are the government, telling everyone that he's the ruling class over America. We need to remind our elected representation that we are the people, and the people are the government, and they represent us in our interests. And certainly, when we give them too much authority over our lives, we are surrendering our freedoms. We should be very, very careful of that.
Mark, to amplify your point, it always amazes me when people talk about national registration. When I look in the fine print, I find that politicians are exempt. They won't list the firearms that they own and let the public know. Not only politicians, judges, and police officers are routinely exempted from these laws. I can understand why they don't want to tell the world what they own, nor do I. Which one of us has fewer resources? Please, Mark.
Yeah, Rob, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Senator Cruz was in a hearing last week talking about so-called ghost guns and traceability, and he brought the point that both he and his wife own firearms, and thank God that the government doesn't have a registry on what he owns. And I think we should be very careful of that we don't create a ruling class over us. It's interesting though when you bring this up. I mean, we talk about these folks on the gun control side who want to put these laws and limits on us, and they talk about, well, the police can go confiscate these firearms if people are in danger. But these are the same people who also talked about defunding the police.
Right.
So, in the National Shooting Sports Foundation, I know the Second Amendment Foundation, we're proud supporters of our law enforcement. I mean, these people are doing every day. And we certainly don't want their job to be any more difficult than it has to be. And these are points of friction that I think some on the other side aren't clearly thinking through. But they talked about defunding the police, taking police off the streets, and when we obviously see what the second and third order effects of that are at right now. We see a lot of those cities that did that are second guessing their decisions. But these are the people that they want to take our guns from us. So my question is, well, who's supposed to come get my gun if you're not going to have police anymore? And if we're not going to have police anymore, how am I supposed to be able to defend myself and my family against a criminal threat that is obviously elevated in a lot of these inner cities that have, defunded their police departments and have cut them back?
That just brings something to mind. I'm amazed I hadn't thought of before. Why do you need a gun? You can just call 911. Well, if you don't defund the police, who's coming when I call 911? Yeah. One more comment up here. Great point from David Wilcox. Criminals are exempt from any law if they might incriminate themselves through compliance. And that's the decision Haynes versus United States.
Yeah, I don't see people lining up in Washington, D.C. to register their illicitly obtained firearms. I don't see people in California, hey, I'm a member of the Crips gang, but I want to make sure that I'm staying within the law, and here's my illegally obtained handgun that I bought on the street corner or I stole from somebody else. It just doesn't happen. It's one of these answers that just it seems so obvious that it boggles our mind that it continues to be pressed forward by the other side.
Well, we have the examples, Mark, of law enforcement in New York and Connecticut refusing to register their modern sporting rifles as well. All of a sudden I go, first time? How's it feel? So it is interesting. The police occupy a political position, except they go, okay, I have my limits.
Yeah, and I think what you find is most of your law enforcement is by and large pro-Second Amendment. They are about you being able to exercise your rights, all those rights. They just want to make sure that you're doing it within the law. I know that we at the NSSF have a very good relationship with the ATF, and a lot of people want to vilify the ATF. But I'm telling you, most of the agents that I've talked to have a very positive idea about gun ownership, and they're gun owners themselves. They just want to make sure that everything's happening within the law, and they want to make sure that we're staying safe. Now, clearly, there are some of those who carry a badge who don't agree with us. There are people who think that maybe only law enforcement should have a badge. I can think of one particular former ATF agent who's been nominated to lead the ATF. Who absolutely, you and I shouldn't have a firearm, and certain firearms that we have, he's testified before Congress. He believes that those should be confiscated. I mean, so these ideas don't grow out of anywhere. I'm fully aware of that, but that's why we have to remain on guard so that we don't have people like that who are put into positions of authority and public trust who are going to usurp our rights from us.
Paul, do we have a second?
Go for it. You got 25 minutes.
And I forget where I saw it, Mark. The NSSF had taken, you watch it now and it makes you cry, a bunch of ammunition and they lit it on fire. And this was not done out of childish glee. This was research. You guys took cases of ammunition. You dropped it from, I think it was a fire ladder truck. The purpose was to let first responders know that ammunition stored in the home is not a danger if the place catches on fire. It doesn't explode and shoot everywhere. The reason that was important, I think, was to preclude some regulations that cities were considering, saying, oh no, you need to limit the amount, quantity, type, and storage on ammunition. And if you think it's hard for you and I, it would have been insane for what they were wanted to impose on some gun stores. Are those videos still available? Are they open to the public? How would I find them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't seen that video. It might have been before my time, but all I kept going through my head as you were talking about that is how much did that cost in today's dollars to do that?
In today's dollars, it would be crazy, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring it up. I mean, there are those politicians who say, well, maybe we should put limits on it. So what they're talking about isn't limiting ammunition or limiting the number of guns. They're talking about limiting your freedom. So that's what it comes down to. We just think you have too much freedom. And I always find it interesting when you see a report in the media that they made an arrest of the house and they recovered a cache of firearms and a cache of ammunition. And it turns out that it was 3 firearms and 200 rounds. I'm like, 200 rounds is a good start for about an hour at the range for me. So
right. Those are rookie numbers.
yeah, you got to boost those numbers. So it's always disturbing when you hear that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's important that we continue to educate the public on these ideas about required storage in the home and required storage in the stores. You're right. I mean, we have states that want to mandate how stores are able to store their firearms when they're not in business, so when they're closed up for the night, and that may be. It may be easy for a big box retailer like Sportsman's Warehouse or Cabela's or Bass Pro Shop to be able to do that. They can build a big vault that they could possibly put their firearms in. But the small mom and pop shops, a lot of these business owners, they're like you and I. I mean, they're entrepreneurs. They're trying to make a living, and a lot of times the space that they're working in is rented space. So these big pricey options may not be within the scope of possibility for them. So we work with them, and actually the ATF works with us on this through our Operation Secure Store program to be able to make sure that they identify ways that they can layer security in a manner that's going to be affordable and work well for them. Again, these could be rented spaces. So we've seen states say, well, you need to have bollards in front of the store so that way you can't crash a truck through the front of the store. Well, if they don't own the space and they're renting that space, they may not be able to put bollards out there. My counter stat is, how about we, lock up the criminals that are doing this before we start to criminalize the store owners who are just trying to have a business. So, but yeah, storage in the home. I mean, we're very big on making sure that your firearms, when not in use, are properly stored. And I make sure that we're clear on that. If you decide to carry a firearm in your home, then it's in use. But if it's not in use, we really strongly recommend that you make sure that that firearm is beyond the reach of anybody who shouldn't have their hands on it, whether it be a small child, prohibited individual, or somebody who may be suffering through a mental health crisis. And that could be the cable lock that comes with the gun, or that could be an RFID safe if that's what you want to use, or a traditional upright safe. I mean, just whatever option is going to work best for you, and those storage options will change over time. I mean, my storage options from when I was a single guy to when I got married and started having kids, and to now that my kids are adult children, and now when I've got grandchildren starting to run around, I have to reassess my storage needs and make sure that I'm doing things that are keep my grandson safe as well, and make sure that I can access my firearms when I need to, should that come up in an emergency. So, yeah, some of these storage laws. I mean, we talk about, Connecticut has Ethan's Law, and of course Senator Blumenthal wants to push that as a nationwide thing. Mandatory storage in the home, and if you're not storing that firearm, you could be held responsible. But it's interesting that the Heller decision didn't just affirm your right to keep and bear arms; it also affirmed that the government can't tell you how to store your firearms. So I see states passing these laws that are unenforceable, but I'm also seeing it flies in the face of the Heller decision. So it'll be interesting to see when some of these cases, someone who may be prosecuted under these storage laws says, "Wait a second. The state doesn't have the ability to tell me what to do in my home with my firearm," because the Supreme Court affirmed that in the Heller decision.
Well, and either one of you correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm remembering the Heller situation correctly, the reason the law before the Heller decision was if you lived in D.C. and you had a firearm, it had to have been disassembled inside your home.
Exactly. Yeah, Paul, you're exactly right, and that's part of what the Heller decision was. It says the district couldn't tell Dick Heller how he had to store that firearm in his home, and by them requiring him to have that firearm disassembled and locked up, it was essentially rendering him disarmed and denying him his Second Amendment rights within his own home. It's a terrible idea to think that was happening for so long in the district, and it was happening in other states.
Comment if I could, Rob, before we get going here.
Yep.
David Wilcox, from back when we were talking about smart gun, there's nothing smart about computerized firearms. And one thing I've started bringing up recently with this is with computers, you get the blue screen of death. You do not want the blue screen of death. It'll have a whole new meaning if your firearm comes up with it.
Paul, you're right. And this is what I tried to explain when I get to talk to media about these issues with smart guns. It really comes down to, we have really good engineers working in some of these manufacturing facilities, designing, today's firearms, tomorrow's firearms. And good engineering always engineers out points of failure. And that's what you don't want. You don't want to have a point of failure for anything that you're going to be designing, whether it be a car or a firearm or, even the computer that you use. You don't want to have those points of failure. But when you introduce a purposeful point of failure, and we know that anything computerized can be jammed, it can be hacked. We also know that, my iPhone that I look at right here, I mean, if I touch it, it doesn't always open up with my fingerprint. It's not always going to open up when my finger's wet. And we think about those moments of crisis when it comes down to life and death, and you're in a moment of stress. Are you going to be able to place your fingertip on that fingerprint reader on a gun the perfect way? Are you going to be able to make sure that it's going to be able to pick up your fingerprint if your fingerprint's wet? And these are moments where seconds literally count in a matter of life and death. And we have government authorities want to interject a point of failure so that your firearm doesn't work when you need it to work the most. Additionally, on top of that, as the industry, we're very concerned that they would interject these purposeful points of failure on us and the manufacturers that would cause these firearm manufacturers to be now sued for a firearm that was defective. So if someone had to use that firearm that was required to have so-called smart gun technology, which we know the administration tested, it didn't even work, but now if it requires it to have it, and that gun fails in that point of friction when someone has to protect themselves and protect their family, now you're making that manufacturer liable for a possible defective product. Well, we know it doesn't work. We told the government it doesn't work, and some in the government just refused to listen.
That's fascinating, Mark, because we have had the Biden administration say it wants to rescind or modify the Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, and you just brilliantly bring up and go, 'Yeah, but you tell me I have to make my gun so it will fail more often.' Well, Good. Are you then going to indemnify me from lawsuits? I suspect not. I hadn't thought of that political point.
No, and let's be honest. I mean, Professor Schwartz, who's literally written the book on tort law, Jonathan Turley has written about this, who's just a preeminent law professor at George Washington University. PLCA is just absolutely grounded in tort law. I mean, we're not the only industry that enjoys a protection of harassing or crazy lawsuits that are going to come out that are just designed to bleed the industry dry. If we look at what we're going through right now and everyone having to get a COVID shot, all those manufacturers of those COVID shots also enjoy special protections as well. Airline industry enjoys it. Even the tech industry with Section 203 that everyone's talking about has a special protection. Yeah, we're not unique on this. And really what it comes down to is the proponents of gun control want to hold manufacturers responsible for the criminal actions of a disassociated third party. So you have somebody out there who illegally obtained their firearm, used it in a criminal way, and hurt or killed somebody, and now they want to hold the manufacturer responsible. That's like trying to tell Ford they're responsible for the death caused by a drunk driver. We're trying to tell someone that, who may have used a Louisville Slugger to beat someone to death, that Louisville Slugger now owes the damages to that family that lost a loved one, and it's just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Well, to amplify your point, if the illegal use of firearms is such a problem, then why do government agencies often hold themselves harmless through qualified immunity of their actors? Put another way, okay, if there's going to be strict liability, are the police going to go first? The city can be responsible for every error the police make.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. It kind of goes back to even the discussion we just had about so-called smart guns. There's never been a police department that said, yep, we're willing to move toward authorized user technology on our firearms. Nobody wants it. I served 25 years in the Marine Corps. I'm telling you, nobody on the battlefield wants it, because if my firearm, my rifle on the battlefield failed for some reason, and I had to pick up another one to be able to use it, I want it to work as soon as I pick it up. It's crazy. I mean, again, these aren't laws that are thought out with logic. They're thought out with emotion, and they're thought out with agenda, and that's it. They just want to take your right away from you.
They make a good press release.
I want to have a little bit of fun with one of our commenters here. George Geller says, I'm okay with any safety features present in 1911. George, I'm going to have a little bit of fun with you here, man. I will guarantee you that nobody will ever, with my Glock 17, the beaver tail safety will never be a problem, nor will the thumb safety. If that trigger gets pulled, the gun is going to go bang. In my opinion only, safeties are a point of failure. I just wanted to have fun with George on that.
Let's remind George that John Moses Browning designed the 1911 in 1906 as a cavalry pistol. It came with a lanyard to be retained. And in that sense, maybe that was appropriate for that environment. I don't plan to go there. Did you ever have to carry that in the service?
I didn't carry a 1911 while I was in service. I carried the M9 or the Beretta 92 during my time in the Marine Corps. And yeah, we had lanyards clipped to them. I mean, it was, weapons retention was always, a very high priority issue to make sure that no matter where you were, and guys, I've been through Fallujah I spent a year in Fallujah. I spent another 7 months in Ramadi area. I spent nearly a year in Afghanistan. So yeah, when you're jumping up and down over walls, through canals, in and out of Humvees, weapons retention is an issue. So, but it's the safety features. I'm good with them, but I remind people the safety feature is only as good as the person that's using it. You are the most important person when it comes to firearm safety. And following those fundamental rules of firearm safety is absolutely paramount. And we do it as a matter of muscle memory, but it's important for us, especially we talk about 8.5 million new gun owners. They just don't know the things that we do. And we were all new to the shooting sports at one time. So instead of us trying to look down our nose, understand that some of these people may not be as comfortable around firearms as we are, and we should be embracing them, bringing them in, and trying to work with them to make sure they understand how to use those safety features correctly. Make sure they understand that it's very safe to carry a round in the chamber of a 1911 45, and that's how it's supposed to be carried. Put that safety on, have the hammer cocked, and it's ready to go for when you need it. So, but I think that's a matter of comfortableness that we have to make sure that they're at before they start to do it, instead of trying to force that upon people.
Isn't that fascinating? We've got 4 centuries of experience with firearms, except for the 10 million, 20 million people who aren't in the gun culture. They don't know about all that experience, and they're having to learn it for themselves. Are there videos at the NSSF aimed at new gun owners? Where would you recommend? And I'm sure you get asked this, not only in your day job, but when your neighbors ask you, where do you send people?
Yeah, so we did a couple of short videos about first-time gun owners, and we always direct them to our Project Child Safe page, NSSF's YouTube page. We have a lot of stuff up there that is aimed at the new gunners. We tried to put that out last year, as we saw firearm sales were going through the roof. But I really give it to a lot of the other organizations. I mean, the Second Amendment Foundation, NRA. Even USCCA put out their own videos. Everyone has really been trying to reach out to these new gun owners and make sure that they understand what's going on, and make sure that they are thinking about just the fundamentals. But I'll tell you guys, I'm sure you see it too. My local range is full. Every time I go in there, there's still a waiting line. The classes are full. So that's encouraging to me to see that people are getting out and learning how to use their firearm and learning how to use it safely, and make sure that they're comfortable with it, because this isn't something that you want to be fumbling with in a moment of crisis. You want to make sure that you know exactly what you need to do with it to protect yourself and your family.
I'm really hoping, and we've got at least 8 million new gun owners in the past year. I'm really hoping myself that when election times come around again, they not only educate themselves on how to safely use their firearms, they educate themselves on how to vote to keep them, is what I'm hoping.
Yeah. So you're Paul. I mean, it's something that the National Shooting Sports Foundation. We have our gun vote program that we kick off during the presidential election years to make sure that people understand what's at risk when they go to the ballot to cast their ballots. But it is right. I mean, these are things that we need to make sure we're reminding people of. Anecdotally, we had heard last year. I talked to one FFL who said that literally he had people standing in a store in California who had no idea about the 10-day waiting period in California, and just couldn't understand why they couldn't take their firearm home that moment, and was standing there literally peeling off $100 bills in front of them saying, what's it going to take for me to walk out of this store with this gun today? And literally the firearm retailer is just looking at him saying, get out of my store. I'm not going to risk my license over you. You're not worth it. But people just had no idea. I mean, people said, listen, I don't even have a speeding ticket on my record, but I know that there's a gangbanger down the street who's buying it out of the trunk of a car right now, and I can't get my gun within 10 days. And they're realizing that these ideas that they never really considered before becoming a gunner now have had an effect on them, and that people have been layering these laws on them that are reducing their rights, but do nothing to stop criminal misuse of firearms. So I think a lot of people are starting to relook at that, and it is our hope that through the efforts of all the different groups like us, that we're able to make sure that people take that into consideration next time they go to the ballot and go to the ballot place and drop their vote for who is going to lead this nation in the future.
Mark, to amplify your point, I've seen a lot of couples where one of them, and I've seen both answers, the guy has a gun or the girl has a gun. Times have changed. They feel more nervous. They feel anxious. They want to both be able to defend themselves and their families independently. And somebody goes, oh no, we need a cooling off period. And the guy goes, so if I were going to, in a crime of passion, I could use my partner's gun, that would be okay. But you want me to wait 10 days, even though there are already guns in the home? They just don't fit me?
Yeah,
Now they've lived it now.
Yeah, it's interesting. We see these arguments, and they talk about trying to be able to protect, people who may be victims of abuse by a domestic partner. And
Wow.
so you're going to put a 3-day or a 10-day waiting period on somebody who believes that their life is in danger by someone who was very close to them at one point. And so you're going to basically keep them disarmed for 3 to 10 days, whatever the state is trying to push, and make sure that they are a willing victim to this person who doesn't care about the law, doesn't care about the sanctity of life, and is willing to break the law and take a person's life or put that person's life in danger, but you won't allow that person to be able to defend themselves. So you're going to make them be a willing victim for 3 days. And I just want to remind your viewers, when they do this, they're asking you to be a willing victim. That's irrational. I mean, it runs counter to every idea of natural law, that you have the ability and the right to defend yourself up to and including deadly force, if deadly force is being pushed upon you.
Gotcha.
Go, Rob.
I guess that's an argument about mandatory background checks too. Hi, if I'm a victim of domestic violence, and now we've heard not only that the feds want 3 days to do a background check, they may extend it to 10, after which I have to appeal through a lawyer to get a ruling. Wow, that doesn't feel safe at all.
Yeah, the so-called Charleston loophole bill, right? So what we really look at when that incident happened was a failure of law enforcement to upload the proper records by the murderer at Charleston. There were records, there were paper records, and they were never uploaded to the FBI. So the FBI never had that information. So when they couldn't find anything, they knew there was something more. They asked that police department for more information, and it just didn't get back in time. And so that retailer completed the transaction as he was allowed to do by law. Listen, we support the background checks. We want them to work the way they're supposed to, but we also know that they don't work unless all the information is in there. And that's why NSSF has been a big proponent of our Fix NICS program. And that's to make sure that every background check works the way it's supposed to, that every disqualifying mental health record that's out there that says someone cannot be trusted with a firearm is put into the system. And no, we're not talking about people who go down to get marital counseling, or someone who has some emotional problems and they want to talk to a therapist about it. That's not it. We're talking about when someone stands before a judge and a judge says, you no longer have a decision in this. The state's going to step in now and say that you have to go seek mental health. You're being involuntarily committed to a mental health facility. And we look at the importance of that. So we look at the Sutherland Springs murders that happened there and the tragedy that happened down there. And that person who committed those crimes was a prohibited individual several times over. He was dishonorably discharged from the Air Force. He was convicted in a court-martial, and that court-martial conviction was for domestic violence. And he had been involuntarily committed to a mental health facility. So any of those 4 different occasions should have disqualified him from owning a firearm. But the Air Force never submitted those records to the FBI. And so he was allowed to go out and purchase firearms on 5 different occasions. And the background check came back and said, hey, he's clean. So they transferred that firearm to him. And he should have never had his hands on a gun ever. So we want that background check system to work. We know that individual should never have had his hands on a gun. But the Air Force failed in their duties to report that information. And that's why we worked with Senator Cornyn to get the Fix NICS Act passed, to give the states more resources to make sure that the background check system is working correctly. And listen, we're not talking about people who are, this isn't an issue where it comes down to, hey, you've got an outstanding parking ticket and you're going to lose your Second Amendment rights. That's not what this does. The Fix NICS Act is trying to make that background check system work as intended. But when you talk about delays, I mean, if you choose, and a lot of the delays happen when there's common names on common dates and common cities. It's John Smith, who's born in New York City on this day. But I'm comfortable putting my Social Security number down on my 4473. I understand some people may not want to do that, but again, I'm retired in the Marine Corps, so I know that the government has all the information they want on me. So listen, they collected my DNA a long time ago, so if they're cloning me, they're probably not getting much out of it, but they've had everything that they want to get. So I'm comfortable with that already. But if you put your Social Security number, it reduces the possibility of that. But if something comes up where they can't make a determination immediately, and I've never had to wait more than a minute for any background check that I've ever had to do. But it comes back and they say, listen, we need 3 more days. then we can understand 91% of those background checks that go into a delay status, and we're talking 91% of those background checks are completed immediately. Of those other 9%, I think it's like upwards of 80% or more are completed within those 3 days, and then there's a very small percentage that are completed within 10 days.
Right.
But the Charleston loophole bill, you're right. It would put it into a perpetual cycle of denial, and that's where we have a problem with it. So it is not just that 10 days, but if they can't make a determination after that 10 days, now it goes into a second cycle where, right, you said, Rob, that you'd have to appeal to the government and prove your innocence. And that's antithetical to who we are as a nation. I mean, this is your right. The government should have to be able to prove why you can't be trusted. So we want to make sure it works the way it's supposed to.
Great question from Clovertack, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this one already because we talked about it a little bit ago. Question, with all this talk by NSSF of wanting background checks and fixed NICs, do they support expanded background checks, universal background checks, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad Clovertack brought that up. We are not in support of universal background checks or expanding background checks. If you want to be able to take your son, your grandson, your granddaughter, your children, your cousin, you want to take them out hunting, you want to take them out shooting, you should not have to go through a background check to be able to hand that firearm to them. And that's what they're talking about, these universal background checks, is that you would have to do a background check every time you transfer that firearm. And then some say, well, we'll make an exception for close family. Well, what if I wanted to take my neighbor out? And I've known my neighbor for 20 years, and I want to take him out, but he's going to use my shotgun. So now I'm going to have to run a background check on that person. And it's ridiculous. It's beyond the pale. Beyond this, the same people pushing the universal background checks are not talking about plussing up the resources for the FBI to be able to keep up pace. We saw last year the FBI was barely able to keep their nose above water with the background checks paces that were happening over the summer, and they were having a very difficult time. We saw firearm background checks that were running into delay status that shouldn't have ever been in delay status because they just didn't have the resources and the people to be able to keep up with it. So we want to make sure that there's enough in there to make the background check system work. But we're talking private sales between two individuals. We don't believe that the universal background check is a good law. We don't believe that it is an idea that should go along. And really, again, the first reason why is because it doesn't work without a national firearm registry. And we absolutely oppose a firearm registry. We don't think the government should be keeping lists of their citizens. It's very Orwellian. It's very Soviet kind of talk that the government would keep any kind of list of their people who are exercising their rights.
We are at the top of the hour, so our time is just about up. But Mark, I got one more topic I want to cover with you real quick, and then we'll go ahead and let you go. But NSSF, one of the things that I look forward to every year that NSSF is responsible for is SHOT Show. Unfortunately, this past January, it was canceled because of the whole COVID thing. It probably had to be. But going forward, I'm already getting emails and encouraging me to sign up for SHOT Show 2022. Could you tell a little bit, anybody who may not have been there, what SHOT Show is and why it's important for the industry?
Yeah, so SHOT Show is our trade show. I mean, it is the equivalent of CES for the tech world, and it's the equivalent of the Detroit Auto Show for the auto industry. This is where our manufacturers are able to roll out all the new products. And we understand manufacturers are rolling out products throughout the year, but this really gives the opportunity for distributors, for retailers to be able to get out, put their hands on these products, feel it, tell you what it is, and be able to make a lot of their big orders for the year. Obviously, when you can order in sizable quantity, you're able to get a reduced price. So, and it's not a gun show like your traditional gun show. You have to be within the industry to get into the show, and that's what we can make sure that people are making most use of that time, and it works for the industry. We're already planning SHOT Show 2022. Floor space is being sold. It's being planned. Aisles are going to be a little bit bigger than they normally were in previous years, so we have a little bit accommodation for the idea of social distancing. And we're also going to be doing some refiguring of the floor, so there's not so many dead ends that we used to have on some of the, like on the main floor. Additionally, this year we're going to be able to actually do the expansion we wanted to do a couple of years ago. So there's going to be the Sky Bridge, and we'll be going over to Caesars Forum, and we'll be able to have a couple of big manufacturers who've already said that they want to be over there. So they'll be pulling people over there. So it'll be a little bit roomer. There'll be almost double the floor space. I've always told people if they're going to come to SHOT Show, make sure you come with a plan, because you're never going to see everything you want to see.
And walking
and now
shoes.
It's going to be even. comfortable walking shoes, lots of hand sanitizer, but it's going to be even bigger. We're looking forward to it. We know that it is one of those. It's one of those events that everyone is, as much as it can be, daunting to take part in, and that it's going to be a lot of work the entire week. It is a time where the industry really is able to kind of come back under one roof and start to trade ideas, talk about things, see what the latest products are, and be excited of who we are as an industry. This is a very vibrant industry. We're growing. We've been growing at a steady pace since 2008, it's looking very bright in our future. We're very excited about it.
Will you be in Vegas?
I will. I'm always up in the media room when I'm not running around in the floor somewhere trying to take somebody somewhere. But
they ought to make you wear bad shoes. That way, we'll know where to find you in the media room. Okay, I'll look for you there.
I'm going to make sure I'm wearing a pair of good steel toes so I can kick my way through some of those aisles if I need to. But
oh my gosh.
I look forward to it. I have a blast. It's always great to see, people that I've learned of in the industry over the past few years. I've been with NSSF for, coming up on 5 years, and it really is a big extended family. And it's always great to catch up with people that you talk to on the phone, or you're trading emails with, and to be able to kind of shake their hand and see what they've been spending the past 2 or 3 years on developing their new rifle, their new handgun, and be able to put your hands on that and see what that is. And I go home with a big Christmas list every SHOT Show, and my wife. So,
one thing, the new gear is absolutely phenomenal every year when I go to SHOT Show. The main reason I go to SHOT Show is to catch up with the people in the industry who I don't get a chance to talk to every day. It's like the world's biggest family reunion. And I absolutely love it every year. I was disappointed this year it didn't happen, but I am absolutely looking forward to 2022.
Paul, it's a really, brain trust, too.
Yes.
Smartest people in the world are there.
It is. You talked about an extended family, and I mean that's before I came into the National Shooting Sports Foundation. I had this idea of the firearm industry was just so big, and don't get me wrong, it is a big industry. But once you get inside the industry, you realize how small it is, that everybody knows everybody. And people at one company know people at the other company. They may have worked together in the past, but everybody knows everybody. And while they're all competing for your business during the day at 5 o'clock and when they shut down shop, it really is a big family. And we all understand that, the success of one company is also going to be the success of another. And we're driving each other to better products, better perfection. And we're all in the same fight together to make sure that our businesses can stay alive. So we're very proud of that the industry is that big tent family.
We are 7 minutes over on a 1 hour show. So Mark, I want to thank you for joining us today, man.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It was great. I can't believe we blew through an hour already. I could probably chew your ear off for another 3 or 4. So thank you so much.
You bet. Folks, I want to encourage you. This week there's going to be daily bullets at 5 p.m. Central Time, Monday through Thursday. Friday I've got medical appointments, but Monday through Thursday this week at 5 p.m. Central Time for the Daily Bullet. Come join us for the news of the day. Thank you, everybody, for watching.